So in this lecture, I want to talk more about the value of truth, just generally. But I also want to talk about the more specific question, how important is it if we are in a simulation? How worried should we be about that? And, just how concerned should we be to find out? So, Nozick's experience machine argument seems to show that we think truth, or at least some truths, have intrinsic value, right? Not just valuable as a means to something else, valuable in and of themselves. Well, but as we saw last lecture, not all truths have the same intrinsic value, right? Some truths might not even have any real value at all, right? Even if they do, it might be pretty low, right? I told you that Ronald Reagan's favorite flavor of jelly bean was licorice. How valuable is that truth? Well, I ask you, right? How much do you think knowing that has enriched your life? If I were wrong about it, I'm not even going to double check. If I were wrong about it, how much would you be harmed? How much worse would your life be made by being in error briefly because of your philosophy teacher about Reagan's favorite flavor of jelly bean, right? Not a whole lot. So then the question is, well, what truths are you wrong about if we are, in fact, in a simulation, as Bostrom thinks we probably are? Well, remember the experience machine, you were wrong about, among other things, about your relationships with other people. You thought that, you were loved and adored by millions, maybe. You aren't. Those people don't even exist. You thought you had a beautiful spouse that cares deeply about you. Person doesn't even exist. They're a fiction, right? Or if they do exist, it's not the real one. You have a fake. That person doesn't care about you. Well, is it the same in the simulation? Are you wrong about your relationship with other people in the same way? Well, as Bostrom sketches it, and as the Matrix imagines it, in neither case are you wrong about other people and your relationship with them and their feelings for you in the same way, right? If Bostrom's simulation hypothesis turns out to be correct, then yes, you, me, everyone we care about, everyone who cares about us just turn out to be lines of code in some giant, really advanced computer, right? In some sci-fi civilization. But other people in Bostrom's, situation are conscious. They do exist. So generally, you are right about how the people you care about feel about you and vice versa, right? We might be wrong in some cases, but we're not systematically deluded in the way we are in the experience machine example. These people really do exist. Most of the time, we are right about how we feel about them and they feel about us. So that systematic delusion you have about your relationships with other people, how those people feel about you, well, in the simulation hypothesis, you're not deluded in the same way about that as you are in Nozick's experience machine example, right? So, is it really as bad, right? And the Matrix is the same way, right? In the Matrix, other people are also brains in these bodies and these giant, warehouse things. But those brains really do have the feelings that we think they do. They're just wrong about where they are and what their bodies are doing, right? So it's not the same sort of delusion in the Matrix example or the simulation hypothesis as you have in Nozick's experience machine. So this philosopher David Chalmers, who wrote a very good article or a very good paper, The Matrix as Metaphysics, which I'm drawing on really heavily in these lectures, Chalmers actually says that the Truman Show presents a much more horrifying case of being deceived than The Matrix. If you guys have ever seen it, The Truman Show, not a perfect movie. I think it's better than The Matrix, though. And in The Truman Show, there's this guy played by Jim Carrey. He is actually the star of a reality show, and he doesn't know it. Everyone around him are actors who were paid to pretend to be his mother, father, best friend, wife, right? And Chalmers would say, I think very rightly so, that this is a lot more horrifying than The Matrix. Why? Well, what's Truman deluded about? He is deluded, he is wrong about the feelings that the people closest to him have for him, right? His quote-unquote best friend doesn't even like him very much. He's just paid to pretend to, right? His quote-unquote wife, also really sick of him. She's just an actress, right? What Truman is deluded about in these examples, how the people he cares about most actually feel about him, what their relationships to him actually are, is way more important, Chalmers says, than what we would be deluded about in the simulation hypothesis if it were true, or what people are deluded about in the Matrix, right? They are not wrong about how others feel for them or their relationships with others in the same way that Truman is in the Truman Show movie. Much more horrifying to be wrong about how those we care about most feel about us than it is to be wrong about the stuff we'd be wrong about in the Matrix or simulation examples. Well, you might say, okay. I'm not wrong about whether my wife or husband loves me or whether my coworkers respect me, but we're still deceived about a lot of important stuff if we are in a simulation, right? Maybe not quite as bad as the experienced machine, pretty bad. We shouldn't want to be fooled in this way. We should want to find out if we are in a simulation. Neo in the Matrix is right to pop the red pill, right? Blue pill bad. Well, Chalmers would say not so fast, right? If you were living in a simulation, what is it you're wrong about? Well, tables, chairs, oceans, all that stuff exists, right? My computer's sitting on a table. I knock on it with my fist. It's there, right? If I go outside and I take a few walks, we live pretty close to the Chesapeake Bay. I will be at the bay. I'll be at the beach, right? All that stuff exists. Chalmers would say what we're wrong about isn't whether tables and chairs and oceans and all this other stuff exists. What we're wrong about is what it is ultimately made of, right? We might think at the fundamental level, tables, chairs, oceans, all this other stuff, we might think it's made out of like fundamental subatomic particles, atoms, quarks, whatever, right? Actually, what it's made out of is computer code. But how important is that? How important is it that we are right about the fundamental nature of reality? That we are wrong about what stuff is ultimately made of at the fundamental level? It's not... I'm a little more worried about this than Chalmers is, but it's not as important as a lot of other things, right? Now you might say, well, look, Chalmers. I'm still wrong about more than that, right? If I'm in a simulation, all this really important stuff that I believe isn't true. I believe that I live in Norfolk or Virginia Beach or Chesapeake or wherever. If I'm in a simulation, I don't live in the real Norfolk or Virginia Beach. I live in Sim Norfolk, Sim Virginia Beach, Sim Chesapeake, Sim Portsmouth, wherever, right? I think I was born in a certain place. I wasn't. I was born in Sim, whatever version that place is, right? For me, Galax, Virginia, right? For you, wherever you were born, right? You think you visited all these cool places. You haven't. You've just visited Sim version, right? But here's what Chalmers would say. Look, when you talk about if our Norfolk or our Chesapeake or our Virginia Beach or our Portsmouth is simulated, it's not like it isn't real. Even if it's just computer code, if I hop in the car and drive through the tunnel, I'll still end up in Chesapeake. Sorry, not Chesapeake, Portsmouth. There's still a place there. It's just, again, I thought I was referring to the real made out of matter one. What I'm actually referring to is the simulation one. It's not the profound skeptical possibility there is no Portsmouth or there is no Virginia Beach or that I'm wrong about that I was born in a specific place. It's just, well, I thought of it as the ultimate real one. It's not. On some level, that might be dissatisfying, but it doesn't mean these places don't exist and you're wrong to think they exist. Let me give you guys an example. When I was a kid, we used to go to the Smokies a lot. Smoky Mountain National Park, right? I also used to live in Knoxville for a few years before I came here. Knoxville is very close to the Smoky Mountains National Park. It's 45 minutes on a good day, an hour and some change on a bad day, right? Bad day being because there are a lot of tourists, people like the Smokies, right? There's this town, Gatlinburg, in the Smokies. And Gatlinburg has what it calls the Space Needle, right? We actually went there a couple times when I was a kid. It's just a really tall bit of scaffolding, like this metal platform. You go out, you can see the mountains. It's kind of cool. You can see Gatlinburg, which is, well, less cool, right? I wouldn't say not cool, but doesn't quite match the beauty of the mountains, right? Well, what I did not know when I was a kid is that the Space Needle in Gatlinburg is actually a knockoff, and a not very good knockoff, of a building in Seattle, Washington, right? The real Space Needle in Seattle, Washington, way taller. The one in Gatlinburg, there's this metal platform. You're not inside. When it's cold, you're freezing cold. The Space Needle in Seattle, all this glass. You're actually super comfortable. Way cooler, way more impressive. And now look, once I know this, the quote-unquote Space Needle in Gatlinburg starts to seem a lot less impressive. It's a knockoff of the real thing. But that doesn't mean that the Space Needle in Gatlinburg doesn't exist, right? It exists. It's just I would put in scare quotes when I call it the Space Needle, right? In the same way, if we're in a simulation, that doesn't mean that Sim Portsmouth, Sim Virginia Beach, Sim Paris, Sim wherever doesn't exist. It just means that they are a simulation of the reality, right? And that might be dissatisfying. You haven't seen the real Virginia Beach or the real Norfolk, in the same way that Gatlinburg's Space Needle now starts to seem dissatisfying when I know it's a copy. But it doesn't raise quite the same skeptical possibility. And I'd add, one of the reasons Gatlinburg's Space Needle is so dissatisfying is it's a pretty bad copy, right? It's way shorter, not even enclosed. I don't know. I'm guessing the thing's safer. They wouldn't let people go up in it. But, the wind blows and you hear this thing creak. The real Space Needle, way taller, enclosed, can and has survived like 8 magnitude earthquakes, right? Or even higher, right? I think it's supposed to be able to survive a 9, right? It's pretty impressive. I am unsure whether Gatlinburg Space Needle would survive a really strong gust of wind. Anyway, brings us to another point. In the simulation hypothesis, the simulation's supposed to be pretty darn good. It's not just a copy, it's a good copy, right? So there might be this vague dissatisfaction. You impress everybody if you take that trip to Paris, but no, you haven't seen real Paris. You've only seen sim Paris. But even then, right, if it's a good simulation, and if we're all simulated, nobody's seen real Paris. We've at best all seen sim Paris, right? Chalmers' point is this. As long as you were always in a simulation, and if in Bostrom's possibility, if we always were, then the simulation doesn't raise the skeptical possibility of a dream, right? If I'm dreaming, that, if I've just had an elaborate dream, I live in Norfolk, and as a matter of fact, I don't, then I'm wrong about it, right? There's a real Norfolk that I'm not living in because I'm dreaming it. But if it's all a simulation, well, then we really do live in sim Norfolk or sim Virginia Beach or wherever. You're not wrong about things in the same fundamental way you are in the dream example. You're not wrong about things in the way you are with Nozick's experience machine possibility. What are you wrong about? What are we wrong about if we are in a simulation? At most, we are wrong about the ultimate nature of the stuff around us. It's not made of atoms or quarks or whatever smaller particle. It's made of computer code. That might be bad to be wrong about that, but how bad? How important is that truth? We might also be wrong about our ultimate place in reality. We think we're in the middle, we think we're in the Milky Way galaxy. In this universe, actually, we are in a computer sitting in a lab somewhere in the real world. Again, there seems to be a value to knowing the true nature of reality. But how much? There is some value here, but how much value? Anyway, I want to talk more about these questions when we get to the discussion section. I want to raise them with these suggestions or thoughts about testing whether we're in the simulation hypothesis. But I suppose I do owe you guys an account of why I think Neo should take the blue pill. Well, here's why I think he should, right? When he takes the red pill, he goes from experiencing the world of the Matrix to experiencing the real world for the first time. Well, lo and behold, as I've said, the real world is a post-apocalyptic hellscape ruled by machines that want to kill you if you're not in the Matrix. It's not a fun place to be, right? So just to know these truths about the ultimate nature of reality, Neo subjects himself to a really, really crappy existence, right? What's more, I won't give away more of the plot, but Neo and his friends, in the course of the movie, murder 1,000 people, right? Also, some people can know these facts about the ultimate nature of reality. Is knowing these truths about the ultimate nature of reality worth living a crappy, miserable existence? I am real skeptical about that. Is knowing these ultimate facts about reality, it's a computer simulation, is it worth killing 1,000 people, which they easily do in the course of the movie? No, obviously not, right? Which brings me to, I think, a concluding point. Even if a truth has a lot of value, it doesn't have an infinite amount of value, right? And I think, we can step away from the Matrix. I think you can even think about this in your own life, right? There are some truths that I think are cool and important. But, I might choose not to learn because it might take too much time, right? I remember reading an article years ago about some results in some fairly high-level math that in a very real sense, mathematicians had proven that some infinities were actually bigger than other infinities, right? And this blew my mind. I thought it was hugely interesting. The proof of this was incredibly involved. Understanding it would have involved me taking a bunch of math classes or teaching myself math. I didn't have the time, right? Actually, since the pandemic started, I had a lot more spare time on my hands. I've kind of like learned enough that I actually understand how this proof works. I won't try to explain it to you guys. I have not learned it well enough to explain it well, because when I tried to explain it to my wife, she just like looked at me like I was talking nonsense, right? My point being, I think this is an interesting, cool, important truth. But when I had other stuff going on in my life, I actually think doing some other stuff was more important than learning this truth. And the same, I'm going to guess, goes for you guys in a lot of other truths, right? So, truth is valuable, yes. And some truths might be really valuable indeed. But truth doesn't have infinite value, and that probably holds even for some very important truths, right? So, even if knowing our ultimate place in reality is pretty important, I don't know that it's important enough that you would subject yourself to a life of unending misery and fear, as Neo does in The Matrix by taking the red pill. I certainly don't think it's important enough that you'd be justified in murdering like just loads and loads of other people as they do in The Matrix, right? So for those reasons, I don't think whatever truth he gets there is worth it. He should have taken the blue pill. All right. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the simulation hypothesis and the general value of truth. Truth has some value. Yes, definitely. The hard question is, how much? What should we be willing to trade off for it? Hard to say that it has infinite value, right?